Bienvenido, Jonah, gracias a todos por venir. Les encargo mucho lo de no estar hablando ahí atrás. Y thanks for being here, Jonah.
Thanks for having me.
Take it away.
All right. Thanks for having me. My name is Jonah Takagi. I'd like to thank Jorge Diego for having me, and thank you for all coming to hear me talk. I don't do this often in front of this many people. I very rarely talk for prolonged sort of periods, so we'll see how it goes. I also tweaked my presentation about an hour before I showed up here, so this is the first time. I'm not sure what you guys are expecting, but it's a little bit about me. It gets personal and weird at times. There's also just parts about my work as a designer and how I work, and I hope that's of interest to you. That's probably why you're here. I'm gonna sit a little, I'll stand a little. I'm gonna have things in both my hands, and we'll just take it from the beginning. So, yeah, let's see how it goes. Do I do this? Okay. So, yeah, I was born in Japan in 1979. That guy on the left is my dad. My dad's Japanese and my mom's American. She grew up in, New England or whatever, north of New York City. They met while he was studying at Yale. He's an architect, and he's the sort of, I don't know, I guess why I'm here today and why I am a designer. My parents split up when I was like 2 years old, and I moved back to the US with my mom. I stayed in touch with my dad. I don't know, he was a big influence on me. I always sort of looked up to him, even though I wasn't in great contact with him. He had a big sort of, I don't know, he was very influential for me. As an architect, he studied at Yale. He worked in New York under Paul Rudolph. And he's kind of an interesting guy. This thing on the right is, kind of indicative of some of the work that he's doing now. He spends a lot of his time as a 75-year-old architect, waiting for his falling water. He's always like, Jonah, Frank Lloyd Wright designed Falling Water when he was 75. He's like, I'm almost there. It's gonna happen. But in the meantime, he's drawing these types of things. Whoa, that's me. So we left Japan. That's my family. When I was in Japan, my mom's there. I moved back to the US and moved to Canada and lived with my grandparents and my mom and my grandmother. And it was a good time. We had a pool and they were near the beach and I enjoyed myself. Oh wait, did I skip one? Oh, maybe I didn't. Okay. Anyway, so this is where I grew up. This is like a very nondescript house in a nondescript suburb in, outside of a city in New England, Hartford, Connecticut, the insurance capital of the world. And it was a great place to be a kid. We lived on the end of a cul-de-sac. Every house looked the same, and this is very typical sort of American, sitcom style childhood. Growing up here, I would just basically look at my dad's portfolio obsessively. I don't know when this is from, maybe 1986 or something, but I would just kind of page through this and just pore over these drawings and, look at the photographs and just make my own floor plans and just play with Legos and basically just yearn to be a designer. And also, I also wish I could have seen my dad more, but I didn't. He was sort of in and out of my life, and that's, I don't know if that had to do with my sort of desire to sort of connect with him just to, through architecture or through design. And at the time I was like 7 or 8 years old, so I wasn't thinking that far in advance, but it was important to me in hindsight. This is another example. His stuff is like pretty weird and progressive, a lot of unbuilt stuff. This is this Earth Bank project from 1978. Yeah, so that's that. I went to this high school, and it was just a public high school, a really regular high school that people go to in the suburbs. And I was really fortunate. It was a public high school, and they had like a really crappy sports program and a really strong art program. So some people, when I went on to art school, they would talk about getting picked on, this or that, the jocks, they'd kick my ass or whatever. But I didn't really have that because the sports team kind of sucked, and they all knew that, and that was fine. So the arts program was strong. They had a really a great music program. We'll get into this, but music's a big part of my life. I played cello from like 3rd grade up through high school, and they had a really strong orchestra program. And I played music, made art, I played soccer or whatever, football, badly, and that was my life in high school. Okay, let's step back one. So I had a really great art teacher in high school. He really encouraged me to apply to art school. I was sort of on the fence about it. I'd taken art classes, I'd taken art classes outside of high school, and I just sort of wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I remember there was a moment, maybe when I was like 10 or 11 years old, where my uncle on my mom's side, Uncle Bob, he was in town, and he saw me playing with Legos at my grandparents' house, and he was like, "You should go to the Rhode Island School of Design. It's a really great school. That's what I hear." And I was like, okay, and didn't really think that much about it. When it came time to apply to schools, I was just, I applied to larger sort of liberal arts universities that had good art programs. I applied to more specific, art colleges and things like that. I also applied to RISD. It was by far the most expensive school, and we couldn't afford that on paper. So that was kind of daunting. And I remember going there for a portfolio review day, and they were like, "Oh, this is pretty nice," and then they started getting into the specifics of the application process, telling me that they were going to look at my transcript from high school, remove all the art and the music classes, and then re-average my GPA with just academics. And I was just like, fuck, this is not going to be good. So I was just like, I'm never going to get in. I was able to get in. I took out a bunch of student loans, and in 1998, I went to RISD. This is, I don't know where this is. This is definitely RISD. I don't know what we're looking at here. This is basically the college from like a helicopter or something. I don't know, but that is what it looks like. It's sort of like when you close your eyes and you imagine college, this is sort of what it looked like, and I was really entranced with it. I liked the school because I looked at other art schools, and it seemed like people were really trying hard to be a certain way, and that wasn't really me. I was just like a suburban kid, and I don't know, it appealed to me. So I went there just kind of not knowing exactly what I was going to do with my life. That sounded really dramatic. Not knowing what I was going to do in college. I wanted to be an architect, but I didn't really feel like that was the best fit. I also wanted to be a sculptor. Architecture appealed to me, obviously, because of my dad. It's something I've been thinking about my whole life. But, I liked making things with my hands. I like the scale, I like just making things, and something about the scale of architecture was really daunting to me. Where there's sort of no constraints. You're just like you're erecting this thing in the world, there's no limitations or something. And that was sort of daunting to me. But I liked the technical side of it. I liked, learning something real that you could apply to whatever. I don't know exactly what, but, and I was also really into sculpture, basically based on the fact that you were sort of making things with your hands. And the scale of it, of course, not all sculpture is small scale, but you were working at a scale that I could sort of understand. In 1998, it was the first year that I think it was the first or the second year that they introduced an undergraduate program in furniture design. It had previously been part of the graduate school, and they spun it off as an undergraduate degree, and I just got into it. It seemed like a perfect sort of hybrid between architecture and sculpture. I was getting some of the technical sort of craft-oriented stuff from architecture, and I was also working at a scale that I could relate to. Also, I was just imagining myself graduating, and I couldn't bring myself to graduate with a pure fine arts degree. I was like, I can do furniture, and if it doesn't work out, I can swing a hammer, I could hang drywall or do whatever, and that did come in handy later in life as I sort of made my way through it, my life. So this is RISD, and it was a typical art school experience. It was pretty weird. I lived in this house here with 12 people. I lived on that corner was my room, and that's my roommate Jack and Kylie, and it was just kind of a zoo, and I think typical of most sort of art school experiences. It was a lot of fun, and we worked really hard, stayed up nights, working, obviously. And this is, in the back of the house, just sitting out there and throwing balls and I don't even know, bouncing balls. And motorcycles and things. So it was a great time. I really enjoyed my experience at RISD. These are a couple things that I made in the furniture department as a 19 or 20-year-old designer, I guess, at that point. The program was really craft-oriented. It was craft-oriented. It was rooted in a really sort of traditional sort of approach to furniture design and craftsmanship. It was really hands-on. I mean, we were cutting dovetails by hand, mortise and tenons. We were veneering things, in veneer bags, but we were cutting our own veneers and book matching things. And it wasn't until probably, I think my senior year, maybe 2002, that incoming students into the furniture design department were even required to have laptops. So we took technical drawing classes, and I think we were on the sort of tail, or it seemed like the very end of that sort of way of teaching, I guess. There were schools that were a little bit farther ahead that had a bigger emphasis on digital processes, but RISD, in hindsight, I think it was actually really great that they taught me how to work this way. But at the time, I was super self-conscious about it. I had friends that went to other schools, Pratt and New York, or the Art Institute of Chicago, that were more focused on digital modeling and things like that. And I felt like I was really missing out, but in hindsight, I am really glad that I was taught this way. So this is a veneering project. We had a semester-long veneering and bend lamination project, and this is a slip cast lamp that I made in my senior year. This is some bench that I carved maybe sophomore year out of plywood with a chainsaw. So I graduated in 2002. And then this happened. I always been playing music my whole life, and let me take a step back. There was some intermediate sort of time. I moved to Portland, Oregon. I worked in a junk store selling, old antique Eames chairs and Hans Wegner chairs and records and old newspapers, things like that. And I made pizza, whatever. I moved to Washington D.C. in 2003 because I was with this girl, and she didn't want to move to Portland, so I moved to D.C. And when I moved to DC, I got into music more, in a more serious sort of way. So around 2000, maybe 2004, 2005, I started playing out with bands, and I pretty much spent, 2005 or 2006 until 2010 just being a band guy. So I was primarily playing electric bass in a bunch of bands. We toured in, kind of everywhere, Europe and America, Canada, and we played once in Mexico City, but that was with another band, and that was actually only 2 years ago. But this is, back then. So, and it was great. I really enjoyed myself. It was something that was really important to me from a young age, and is still very important to me. I gave a talk on this at Jorge Diego's studio the other night, which is more comprehensive, but this is the Cliff Notes version. So. This is touring in 2005. It was pre-iPhone. You couldn't do that. There were these big areas where there was just nothing in there. You wanted to see what was in that white area, and you couldn't get in there. And it was kind of just driving around and going to places, and you could see, you had to be at the crappiest bar you could imagine at 2 p.m. and you play at 10 p.m. You could drink as much as you want and do whatever, but you just spent a lot of time waiting. So that kind of drove me crazy after a while. You're sort of at the mercy of the 4 or 5 other people in your band, and I did it for 4 or 5 years, and it was great, but it wore on me. So when I wasn't touring, when I talk about swinging a hammer and doing drywall, I was basically just doing that. I was doing all kinds of jobs, whatever would pay the bills. I got good at plumbing, at the Sawzall, I was spraying, paint spraying, and doing whatever, just working with friends that were contractors and helping them do odd jobs to make money while I wasn't on tour making no money. So that happened. I was also working at a place building sets. And again, it's just, theatrical stuff. This is for some public broadcasting talk show. I wasn't designing the stuff, I was just making the stuff. Faux finishing, making MDF look like brick, etc. And then, back on the road, it was basically spending, 8 or 9 hours a day in that thing. with like 4 other dudes, and it was, it just got old fast. And then, waking up in Gainesville, Florida, and seeing that, and you're just, why? You're like, what am I doing here? It's really intense, you just, especially when you're on tour, you spend like 23 hours just waiting and waiting to do like the most interesting, amazing thing that you could ever imagine, and then you just have to wait more and then do it again and again. So, yeah. Then this is like kind of the end of the music zone for me, at least as a touring musician. We were opening for this big band in like Webster Hall, we were doing all these shows with them, and they were, sold out, 2,000 seat shows, and we would open for them, and it was really great. And my mom came down, it's me and my mom, and then she was like, "Yeah, this is amazing, you must be doing so well, you're making so much money." And then I was like, we got paid $250, and there's 5 people in the band. I was like, I got $50, I'm in New York, beer costs like, whatever, $10, and then that kind of like, she stopped smiling. Like, this is right before we got into this situation. So, yeah, so moving on from that, I turned 30, and, well, then I started being a designer. It wasn't like I hit this sort of moment and all of a sudden I was like, I'm going to be a designer. I had always been sort of obviously interested in design and just curious about things, while I was on the road or whatever. I remember touring in Europe, and everybody was hungover and, asleep, and I took the city bus into Copenhagen because I was like, I need to see, X, Y, and Z, and this is really important to me, and then I'll meet you at the venue and, wait for 10 hours with you guys. So I had always been interested in this stuff, sort of in parallel, but when I sort of stopped touring as much, I was able to devote more energy to this. Let's think. So I was still working, at this shop, building sets and, doing that type of thing for commercials and reenactments of, dramatizations of crimes and whatever, these type of low-budget kind of shows. And this was the first thing I designed since I decided to become a designer. Obviously it's a 5-legged circular table. I found, they have a big furniture fair in New York, ICFF. It's every May, and they have a program where if you apply to it as a young designer, they'll give you a free booth, and you can exhibit your work for free, and you can get attention and meet, other designers and things like that. So I designed this and built this on my own. I built one of them. I sent them sent them photos of it. This is in back of the warehouse where I was working. So sent them these things, they accepted it, and then I sort of had to come up with an identity for myself. And this was, technically, I'm kind of more going by my name now, Jonah Takagi, as opposed to Atelier Takagi. I felt like at this point I had to like legitimize myself, so I came up with this name, which is basically refers to a workshop, and it's my last name. But I started writing emails in like the royal we, I was like, we design these things, and it's just me and my cat and like a spare bedroom. So I was just like really trying to like pump this up. At one point I had like all these fake email addresses, and I was like juggling these identities. I was Alicia, and I was like the press person. It was like it got really messy, and I still get like emails like addressed to Alicia at Atelier Takagi, and I'm like, whatever. So I printed out some vinyl and went to ICFF. I made 3 of them. I don't know, I just put it on a credit card, drove up to New York in my Subaru, parked illegally, ran them in the front door. It was really something that you can all probably relate to. And showed work there. It was a really great experience. I met designers from all over the world. I thought it was going to like really change my life, and this was going to be the thing, and I'm going to be a designer, and it's done. But it didn't quite work that way. It was a great experience. I met a lot of people. It was really eye-opening, but I returned home. I returned home but I returned home just doing whatever, working, doing set design or whatever. And I was sort of hungry for the next thing. Hungry with those. That wasn't really, that was good. So I was looking for more opportunities to show my work in the same sort of setting, in a forum for young designers that were just getting started. I went online and did some Googling, and I found a similar program in Germany, and it was for IMM Cologne, which is the second biggest fair in the world after Milan. I had never been to Germany before, so I thought it was a good idea. It was a similar type of thing. The ICFF studio was about 10 designers. In Germany, it was about 50 designers. So it was already the scale of that program increased exponentially. And the size of the fair, it was about 10 to 20 times as big as ICFF. I mean, it was like really overwhelming. So I made a few things. And this is where I think maybe I started to feel like more of a designer, because I'd already had this other show under my belt. So this is where we get into just me walking through a bunch of projects. Some of the projects are, you know, shorter, and we're not going to talk about them that much. And other ones I'm just going to go really deep into, and it gets kind of tedious, and you'll see every step. This is a project that I brought to Germany. Well, obviously this is not the project, but this is the inspiration. You know, I think part of being a designer is just being curious and just noticing things, you know, looking around and keeping your eyes open and just compiling this sort of lexicon of whatever forms or objects, or just noticing how people are living and working. I spent a lot of time sweeping it as a whatever, you know, hanging drywall or working in the set design shop. So I was obsessed with like this wooden threading sort of pattern, you know, where the broom handle goes into the broom. So I decided to make a range of furniture that employed that technique, or that moment, I guess, and expanded into a line of flat pack furniture. So I spent $100, got this tool, and just made this stuff myself in the wood shop that I was sort of, you know, nights and weekends when I wasn't building sets, I was doing this. And developed this furniture line, I guess. I mean, it's a series of, there are 2 different height legs, and there's a bunch of different shapes, you know, square, rectangular, there's a couple different sized circles, and it basically you can swap the legs out. With this, I was just hoping to go for, you know, instead of employing, you know, hardware, you know, metal hardware or something like that, I wanted to make these collapsible pieces of furniture out of one material, you know, where the method of attachment also became an aesthetic sort of detail. So, you know, the wooden threads, I extended them much farther down the leg than they needed to go, just to draw attention to that, and you could, you know, see it sort of from afar. And it also, that little kind of mechanical fastening moment became, you know, an aesthetic choice. I also, we'll get more into this lamp later, but I also made a lamp. It's on the poster. This is the first prototype that I made. I just started to teach myself, not SolidWorks, it was like some junky 3D modeling program that doesn't exist anymore that probably 20 people were using. I was really fixated on being a Mac guy. And I was like, I'm gonna use this program, and probably 20 people use it. It was like the most buggy thing ever. But it got me thinking about, you know, just ways to use, you know, how to sort of incorporate other ways of working, in this case, you know, 3D modeling and sort of digital processes into my sort of lo-fi, handmade, craft-oriented approach. So yeah, it's steel, and I have this part spun on the top, and it's all spray painted, and took some nice pictures of it. That's me in Germany. There's several lights and this stuff here. I went over with a friend who sculpts trash out of wood, and I just needed a hand. So I was like, you can come and you can show your work in Germany, and it'll, you know, we can hang out, and you can, you know, have to go to the bathroom, you know, you can sit there and man the booth, and practical considerations. So this was sort of I was talking to Jorge Diego about this, but this is sort of this moment. So I met a bunch of people in New York, and nothing really stuck. It was like, you know, I'm a nice guy, and we have a pleasant conversation with an editor or you know, a writer from a design magazine or a manufacturer. But when I went here, it was 2010, and I was, I think, the only American showing amongst these 50 international designers. So I was sort of this novelty, and you know, I started to run into some of the people that I'd seen in New York, and they were just sort of taken aback. You know, they saw me, I was completely out of context. They were like, what, you know, you're here from the US, what are you doing? You know, this is weird, you know, and you're not based in New York, you're based in Washington D.C. It really just kind of got them sort of engaged in what I was doing. And that opened a ton of doors for me, especially when it came to sort of press and exposure. Coming off of this, this is the fair. I don't know, it's kind of a boring picture. So when I came back from Germany, I mean, I just remember, these people that I connected with. A lot of them were American writers that I had met in New York and then again in Germany. One of them reached out, Dan Rubenstein, who was the editor at the time of Surface Magazine. He was like, oh, this is a good story. You showed in Germany, you're not based in New York, you're, from Washington, D.C., you made this work, people like it. Let's do a story about you, or a profile. And, but we want to take your picture, we need to have you take the picture in New York, and we need you to bring your stuff up there. So I was like, oh, this is great. The previous year at ICFF, I went to this party at this showroom called Matter. And I was like, that was a great party. People seemed nice, it looked nice. So I just cold called Jamie Gray from Matter, and I was like, hey, I was at this party, there's a magazine, they want to take a picture of me and my work. Can I take it at your space? And he said, sure. At the time, they had been a retailer and selling, really interesting brands, Established and Sons and Moy and things like that. And he was sort of formulating this plan to create their own in-house brand and self-produce work in small batches. So this is me at Matter with my stool and this other thing. The person that wrote the article later became a good friend of mine. Her name is Monica Kemserov, and she went on to found the blog Sight Unseen. So you just start meeting these people, and things snowball. And if you're a decent person, good things happen to you, and if you're lucky. So this is just some of the press that was sort of generated from that show in Germany, and then by extension my work with Matter. The conversation with Jamie during the photo shoot turned into him expressing interest in licensing this lamp and also the kind of screw leg stools that are called Simple Machines, and licensing them as part of the first Matter Made collection in 2011 maybe? I think it was 2011, which is really great. I had no experience with any of this. And just to go back, and I think it's sort of been obvious in my presentation, I have a BFA, just a bachelor's degree. I've never had an internship with a designer. I've never worked in a studio. So all of this stuff was just like me trying to figure it out for myself. I didn't have a mentor, and I don't know, you just make it work. So I didn't know how to do 3D modeling. I didn't know what design licensing was. I didn't know what was normal. I didn't know how to negotiate contracts or anything. And it worked. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And this was okay. So this is just an exploded view of the drawing. I had to actually sort of go through and re-engineer it because it's really easy to make one and sort of just to fake it, and it's sort of theatrical, and you can just put it on a thing and take nice pictures of it, and it looks really great, but it doesn't really reflect the realities of manufacturing. So I had to go through and with the product developer at Matter sort of rework this whole product and get into the specifics of how it works as a commercial product. These are a couple of early renderings. These are not my renderings. I'm not this good at rendering things. This is a person at Matter who did this. The first batch, so on this joint here is kind of a lot. I mean, it's deceptively simple. It's these 3 tubes that are all sort of meeting together. They're all indexed, and in order to achieve that sort of clean joint, you could weld it, but you'd have to like grind it all down and get everything back into kind of submission, and the curves have to be all fair and everything. So I'm a bike guy. I like bicycles, and I know that there was a technique called silver brazing, where you can use a silver rod. I mean, it's a mix of silver and I think brass and a couple other things. It has a really low melting point, and you can just use an oxyacetylene torch to heat the joint. It warms it up to a certain point. I mean, you start to identify about when it's ready to go, but then you just tag it with this silver brazing rod, and through capillary action, it wicks the silver into the joint. And it's really nice because it allows you to just have these really, really clean joints without a lot of slag and without like a fillet or, from, maybe traditional brass brazing or through TIG or MIG welding. For the first run, they couldn't find anybody to do it, so I think I made probably 50 of these, and they hired me as a subcontractor, and I was still at this time working at the theater, and I was silver brazing these things at night and on the weekend. Formatter, they were paying me, I don't know, $20 an hour or something like that. And I did that for a while. So maybe I made 25 or 50 of them. They eventually found somebody that could do it better than I could, and faster and cheaper. These are just some REL color samples. Now they're offered in a ton of different colors. There's a lot of color combinations and metallics and different chord combinations. So I don't know, I've never really done the math and figured out how many different options there are, but there are a lot. And just to go back, I was still building weird sets. I don't know what this was, Henry King Lear or something like that. So I was still working, just dusty in an unheated warehouse outside of Washington, D.C. This here is the next project I did. So through that Surface interview, I said that I'd met Monica, who's a good friend of mine, and she, in 2010 or 2011, started doing shows associated with her blog her blog called Sight Unseen, which she founded with Jill Singer. They invited me to be a part of a group show that was a bunch of young designers, and this is just another project that I did. So it started off with this kind of iconic, or maybe not iconic for everybody, but for me, I would see it a lot in workspaces, is to protect a light bulb in a work environment. I was sketching on that and just created this kind of pseudo-industrial looking light, and I was getting better at rendering, sort of, and better at modeling, so I was able to model this thing, and I decided to make a few of them. So again, my approach, and this is something that, I know there are a lot of students here, but you can just do this stuff. I mean, you could pay somebody to do it, but I find it easier to make it myself. I feel like no one's, and this has been a problem as I've grown my studio, because it's hard for me to delegate responsibility. I'm always like, no one's going to care about this as much as I am. No one's going to want it to be as good as I want it to be. So I'm just going to do it myself, which is really hard as the projects get bigger, and it's something that I've struggled with. But this is how I do it. So I printed out my drawings. I bought a $25, $50 ring roller. I was using this MIG welder, at this set design studio. And again, nights and weekends, I made this prototype. I called it, I don't know, this is sort of right on the edge of like when this whole like sort of Memphis, Milano sort of thing was happening with squiggles and bright colors. It's kind of coming back in a weird way. And I felt like there was something about this that sort of reminded me of the sort of Memphis movement. Maybe it was sort of a reaction to some cold modernism or something. I think maybe it was the combination of material, different finishes, and I felt like it had a Memphis vibe, but I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge that. So I called this the Bluff City Light, which is Memphis in the US. The city in Tennessee is also known as Bluff City. So I thought it was a sort of clever thing where I could acknowledge it if I needed to, but without actually having to say that this was a Memphis-y piece of work. I showed it in New York, and the American lighting company Rowland Hill liked it. Jason Miller had just started this company about 2 years prior, and he was looking for new designs. And in particular, he was looking for just sort of designs that didn't require a lot of complicated assembly and things like that. So this is their first turnkey product. They licensed it, and it was their first, I think it was their first product that was made overseas. Everything else up to that point had been made in Brooklyn. And it's sold really well for them. It's been a great, it's had a life. I mean, it came out with them, I think, in 2012, and it's been selling well up into today. It's spun off into 2 different sizes. This is the larger, I think, 14-inch size. Again, more REL colored things, and these are the 2 lights that are currently available. There's, I think, 2 or 3 different colors of each size right now. From there, we'll move through this one quickly. This was a project I did. I spent a lot of time on set looking at lights. Decided to incorporate this diffused light by bouncing light off of this disc that had a kind of almost a reflective powder on it. I guess this, I don't love this. I think it's okay, but it sort of segues into the fact that I went to Italy in 2011. This is the last time I did this type of show. So moving from the show in Germany, this is basically a similar type of thing. It's called Satellite, and we're in, so ICFF Studio is like 10 people, then 50 in Germany. This probably has 125 people or 150 people. And it's individuals, it's studios, it's different schools. You have people that just graduated from university all the way up until, people that are sort of have their career more established. It's a really great forum to show work. I encourage you all to do this if it's of interest. It's a little intense, Italy's a great place to go on vacation. It's kind of a hard place to get things done, it's just a cultural thing. I don't know, the food's good, it's a beautiful place, but this is, I remember it was a real pain in the ass just to get my work there, to get it delivered, to deal with the crate and everything. But it was a really great experience for me, and at this point, I had a few products that I had licensed, and this sort of kind of took me over the edge. It was after this show that I was able to finally leave my job for the most part. When I came home, I don't know, this is another project. This is what happened afterwards. I'd always been interested in architecture, architectural elements. I take a ton of pictures. I have 10,000 pictures on my phone. I'm constantly deleting apps so I can take more pictures. But, taking pictures of the grate here, or this kind of, OSB and cast concrete situation. I don't know what that was, out of a car or something. And I wanted to do something special. So at that point, Matter was also doing additions. So aside from the light that I produced with them and the other wooden furniture, they asked me to do like a one-off piece. So it's kind of a rudimentary rendering, but I had this idea just to make this sort of table, and this is more of a boutique sort of commission thing. I mean, it's really expensive, and I think we sold one of them. So it was interesting for me as just sort of an exercise as more sculpture, I guess. So I wanted to incorporate architectural elements into a smaller sort of form factor. And I always remember being a kid and lying on my back and looking at the underside of tables and just, everything seemed so huge. It seemed like some sort of pavilion with these cantilevered things. So I wanted to make a small occasional table that had some of that. So, if you got down on your stomach and you were looking at it, it would just look like the most epic thing you've ever seen. Or if you were a kid, you might have your mind blown. At this point I wasn't working there full time anymore, but I was calling in favors. This is the set shop that I had been working at for the previous 7 years. And I was like, hey, Paul, can I come in there? I'll throw you some money. Can I use your welder and table saw and things like that? So I made this myself. This is one of two. I think this one sold, and they have another one somewhere in storage or in the gallery. But you can see there's, sort of abstracting just common sort of architectural elements, whether it's a truss or these planks, or in this case up here, it's a powder-coated aluminum I-beam. There's a Corian kind of box type of thing, and a concrete column. This is the finished piece, and to date, this is one of the things I'm sort of most happy with. I think it's just weirder. I kind of made it for myself. I didn't really make too many compromises because there wasn't a client that was asking me to, make changes or to do anything differently. You can see it's like a little Barcelona pavilion or something. Then in 2012, I got an email from Jeffrey Burnett, who's an American designer, who designs for B&B Italia and a lot of other companies. And he was part of a curation team that was working with Kvadrat, which is a really great fabric company. And they're based in Copenhagen, they're a Danish company, but I'm not really sure where in Denmark they are. But they were relaunching a fabric from 1965, I think, and it's called Hallingdal, and it's a really nice woven wool fabric. They tasked a bunch of designers in different regions. I think it was, the Americas and Europe and Asia and whatever, to design an object for an exhibition. Again, it was a one-off object, so it didn't have to be commercially viable. And I, again, interested in sort of small spaces and the sort of intersection of maybe furniture and architecture, started drawing these sort of day beds. and they kind of, maybe that's a desk or something. I just done a ton of these sort of renderings. At this point I was using Maxwell, and the renders start to look a little more realistic. Yeah, so I was dealing with this sort of space within a space, and kind of soft architecture, campaign furniture, all things that sort of resonated with me, being interested in architecture but wanting to work at a smaller scale. This is sort of what I came up with. I mean, it's not quite accurate. I had to make some changes to the structure, but this was where I sort of ended up. I did all the woodwork myself and then brought it to an upholsterer that did a really amazing job with the Hollingdall fabric to upholster and sort of create the canopy and the pockets and the associated, the pillows and things like that. Here's the picture. So this haunts me to this day. So there's this thing, it looks pretty good. I made this and it had to break, there are these sort of joints on the upright. So it broke into two pieces and I had to crate it up and send it to Italy for a show in Milan in 2012. I really jumped, I was going to say jumped out of my ass, but that's I said it, so whatever. I jumped out of my ass. I really went to the end of the earth to make instructions that were like bulletproof. They were just like Helvetica, Illustrator, line weights, like beautiful things. How to assemble this thing and how to do it right, like it was intended. And they blew it, and they didn't do it right. So it is hard to tell. I mean, it looks sort of good here, right? So there's a pipe, that back bar right there is removable, and there's sort of a pipe pocket in that blue section, and there's Velcro that's supposed to wrap around. This whole thing is supposed to be a really tight, clean piece, but here it's sort of loose. So it's immortalized in magazines and in promotional brochures in this half-baked sort of state. I showed up to the exhibition in Milan and just had to get technical and fix it for them. So you can see this is sort of as it was intended, although the photograph is not that great, but it's Velcroed and wrapped around the top bar, and it comes down and it's through the pipe pocket and everything's clean and as intended. This is a photo from the exhibition. Okay, so that's me. This is in high school. This is back in time. And I think that's Alex's book. This is our prom, or junior prom. That's Dan, and I think her name's Veronica. So Dan and I have been friends since we were 13. We played in bands and stuff. He was a drummer, and I was doing other, playing bass and things like that. So he's like my oldest best friend. He eventually went to business school and got an MBA and graduated in 2009, and he was looking for something to do. He wasn't like a quant jock, he wasn't like this numbers crunching guy, and he wasn't this turbo aggressive business kind of guy. He was just Dan, and he's amazingly smart and gifted, and he's just got his head in the right place, and he's my best friend. So he was looking for something real to do. He wanted to not just work for Coca-Cola or Kraft or something. He wanted to create things. He doesn't have a background in design. So we started talking, and what initially started as a conversation between he and I about him helping to sort of grow my business, self-producing objects, which I was doing to some degree at the time, it turned into something much more ambitious. Field. This is a company that we started. So we, through conversations with friends and family and things like that, we decided to create a brand that was a designed goods brand, and we decided to call it Field. At the time, in 2012, we were doing a lot of research, and we were looking at what people were buying, and we were looking for room in the sort of marketplace to carve out space for our brand. At the time, there was a lot of emphasis on workwear and the sort of men's kind of heritage brands and things like that, whether it was, Filson bags or, I don't know what's another good example, but, Red Wing boots and things like that. So what we decided, we were kind of thinking about, our customer and who we wanted to sort of go after. Typically, and this is broad strokes, and there are probably people that don't necessarily agree with me, but we were looking at people that were buying design goods, and we did a survey and sent out this stuff to focus groups, and found that typically, things that were marketed towards women, men weren't really interested in those types of goods for a lot of societal, whatever hang-ups and insecurity, whatever. But that just proved to be the case. So, and then goods that were marketed toward men, most women in our experience and in our research, they don't really care. They were just like, this is good. They can sort of, are free-thinking people, or whatever. So we decided to make a home accessories brand that created goods that were sort of marketed towards men, and like, IDEO or something like that. You just aim for the extremes and the middle takes care of itself. So these are some mood boards that we did, pulling things like, Early Braun, Marlene Dietrich, these kind of rich, sort of masculine stuff, and created a design brand. We worked with a consultancy in New York to come up with the branding. We have, this logo, and we have this whole brand guidelines. It's very formalized, and we launched our company in 2012. We have a handful of products. They're all, up until recently, they've all been made in the United States using fabricators in and around Chicago, where Dan is based, or on the East Coast, where I was based at the time. We work with designers that are friends of ours that, it also was an extension of, I would see friends of mine that were designing these amazing products that were having a hard time finding a client or finding an outlet for their work. And I experienced the same thing as an independent designer, and I was like, screw it, we'll just create this company. This is by a friend, Oscar Diaz, and I'm like, I respected him, and I was like, man, I wish I designed that, and I was like, well, let's just make it. So we worked with friends initially, and then sort of cast a wider net at a certain point, and now we have, I don't know, maybe a dozen products that we're selling. This is cast in 304 stainless steel, then bead blasted, and then electro-polished. It's a really interesting process that they use for sterilizing and finishing medical equipment. And basically, you can do it to stainless steel. You put it in this bath, and it draws chromium from inside the metal up to the surface. So it's not an additive process, so it doesn't add any thickness. You can use it for high tolerance parts that have to interface with each other. And it's not like a plating process or a powder coating or anything. This we've had for a while. This is our bottle opener. This candle holders I designed. I do some design work for the company, but it's really more about sort of relationships with external designers. We work with designers from all over. So Oscar, he's based in London. This is these are bookends designed by a duo in, I think they're in Adelaide, Australia, Daniel Emma. This is a friend of ours in Lausanne, Switzerland. He teaches at ACAL, and he designed these outline measuring tools. And at this point, we have 3 different shapes of these, protractor, ruler, straight edge kind of things. And this is actually our first product that we produced overseas. It's made in China now, after a few production runs in the US, and we were sort of interested in seeing what it would be like to produce things overseas. Desktop organizer. We also have done some exhibitions. So this is from a curatorial, marketing, promotional sort of thing. So this is New York Design Week in 2013, and we decided to do a travel-themed exhibition. Again, I probably will say it over and over. I mean, for me, design, it's just about the people. It's about sharing food. It's about going to places you want to go. It's about admiring your friend's work, and it's about the people, really. So this is a group show, and it's a variety of work, from traditional crafts and existing objects to objects that were created specifically for the show. So on the left, it's Belenki Bike Works. They make these crazy handmade frames and put together these bikes that are insanely expensive, but they take 1,000 hours to make. This is a friend of mine, Colgate, who I went to RISD with, and he makes these boats. He made this by hand, steam bent, Kevlar, and it's really wild. We had a graphic designer make some travel theme, like travel posters, and he's based in Belgium. Swiss designer making scale models of rockets. That's the Saturn V, and believe it or not, that is the actual size relative to some of the earlier rockets in the NASA space program. We had photography. Some of the items were for sale, some of them weren't for sale. We have this kind of campaign furniture by some designers in Oregon, and some Czech designers made these die-cut posters. So we really enjoy doing this type of thing. It's an excuse to get people together, to get them in the same room. It's an excuse to entertain clients and to sort of generate new business and new buzz in between product launches. All right, so this is a nail in a wall. This is back to some product stuff, and I'll start sort of move through this one pretty quick. I was given a brief to design a simple coat hook, and I thought it doesn't get much simpler than a nail in a wall or a thumbtack or something. It just seemed like a very clear, sort of way of thinking about this problem. I just basically made these dowels that kind of go into the wall. It's pretty straight ahead. I make a lot of paper models in this way as a way of working, just kind of, getting out of the computer, I guess, and into the real world. It's just typing paper, and I taped it together. These are, going through the sort of color process, just selecting colors for the collection. And these are the finished products. Right now, they're produced by a Swedish company called Hem. They're based in Stockholm, and if you're not familiar with them, I have a vested interest because I work with them, but you should check them out. They're a really great company to work with, and the work is obviously amazing. So here we go, and they worked out this really clever way of mounting this on the wall very discreetly. The branding's all on point. They run a really tight ship. So this is 2014. As I said, music was a big part of my life. My partner at the time, my recently ex-partner, I don't know, we have this band together. So I spent all of 2014 making a record with them. It was professionally irresponsible. I didn't do much during that year design-wise. I just wrote and played on the record and recorded it in our basement and at a studio in North Carolina. The record came out in 2014, and it did really well. It was on a lot of best of the year lists or whatever. The band is called X-Hex, and this was called Riffs, and it's a really great record. If you haven't checked it out, you should do it. I'm credited as the producer. 2015, and I think there's just a few more projects, and these are maybe a little bit more kind of long form. There's a company called Artsy, and they're this cataloging and auction company that catalogs modern art, and they do these sort of interventions at art fairs, whatever, Design Miami or these, things that happen. I've actually never been to any of those fairs, but I did a little bit of reading and talked to some people about them, and they seemed like a real spectacle. Artsy approached me to do a sort of a collaborative intervention with them, and it was going to be an installation at Collective Design Fair in New York in 2015. Thinking about art fairs and what I'd heard, they seemed to be this real spectacle where it's sort of a who's who. You go see the Kardashians or whoever, and then there are people buying whatever, works of art, I don't know what they do there. They go partying, do things. So there was this sort of outward-facing thing, just the whole spectacle and just people watching. And then there was also the sort of inner sort of dealings, the sort of behind-the-scenes stuff, the non-glamorous part of things, where money and hushed words and this whole back, smoky kind of things happening. So I decided to look at that through the lens of this spectacle and sort of theater. This is the Roman Colosseum. I've never been there. This is from the internet, picture of the inside of it. So yeah, there was a budget for it, and I was sort of working backwards, and it wasn't a huge budget, so I was like, I want to make X amount of money, and what's left, is what I'm going to use to make this thing. So I was kind of trying to use modest materials. This is a carpet underlayment, and basically it's just, I would like to believe it's recycled. I have no idea if it's actually recycled. It could be a product in and of itself, but we'll just go with wishful thinking. I think it's basically recycled foam that's, using some sort of binder. It's probably toxic as hell, I don't know. But it's all bound together with some sort of adhesive, and it's in these sheets. And you can buy a huge roll of this, to do whatever, like a living room or something for like $20 or $50 or something. So I bought a bunch of this stuff and proceeded to take a step back. This is what I was sort of imagining. And it's this Coliseum-like seating on the outside, which is kind of public-facing, where, the gawkers and everybody can go sit there and look for, B and C-list celebrities at the art fair, or A-list celebrities. And then there was this sort of inner seating area that was very sort of isolated and utilizing the acoustic properties of foam, which kind of create this kind of really hushed, insulated seating environment. This was way too big for the space. I was like, I want to do this huge thing, and then they actually gave me the floor plan, and I had to scale back my ambitions. So it turned into something. This is a kind of exploded working view, but it ended up being about a 90-degree section of that full Coliseum. Again, calling in favors back at Paul's shop where I was building sets, in this unheated, unair-conditioned warehouse, and I built this thing myself. My friend Scott helped me a little bit, but yeah, I CNC'd some of these parts, like these sweeps. I wanted that to be pretty precise, and the rest of it was me sitting there, with double stick, whatever adhesive and stuff, and gluing this foam onto this piece. I had to be really careful because I wanted it to look really architectural and super pristine. And this is the piece in situ. I loaded it into a U-Haul truck, and Scott and I drove it up to New York and installed it in this venue for this art fair on the west side of Manhattan. So I think it turned out pretty well. It's a 90-degree section, and it's all sort of veneered in this foam. You can see a close-up on the left. It almost looks like some sort of aggregate material like you might see in the Roman sort of Colosseum, like early versions of concrete. So it references that. And then, since I had to make a 90-degree section of this, I could have, easily have covered up the left side of this. But going back to like my background in theater and, this sort of, I don't know, I guess the nature of the sort of spectacle, I decided to leave the ends of this exposed so you could sort of imagine it as an extruded sort of shape or a revolved extrusion, I guess. But then it also references theater and sort of speaks to the whole spectacle and the nature of this, the pageantry or whatever at these art fairs. There's a bunch of friends sitting on it. That's Scott in the blue. And yeah. So here's the Barcelona Pavilion. I don't know when this was from. I think it was built in the 30s maybe, but it's a very influential piece of architecture here. Again, going back to architecture, this is something I was into. In 2013, Umbra Shift, they're a company based in Canada, they sent me a brief and they wanted a table. So going back to these sort of architectural elements, these cantilevered forms and these open sort of spans, I guess, and these, and these columns, on the edge. I came up with a table design, and it's pretty close to what's circled up there with these long sort of cantilevered forms and these open expanses. Some just details of the joinery, and it's made now. It's produced by Umbra Shift, and this is early rendering. It looks sort of similar. Again, these are cardboard models. I know for all you students, this is really important to do. It's much easier to do this than to try to have somebody make it for you and find out that you did it wrong or that it was too small or too big. Here's the actual work as it's produced now by Umbra. They're 2 different sizes and a couple of different colors. It's a mix. It's all steel at this point, and it's a little bit too heavy, I think, for me. I think I should have made the tops a little bit thinner. And there's the table. Now we get into some work that's a little bit, maybe not quite experimental, but that's a little bit more interesting to me, and this is stuff that I've done in the last 2 years. There's a group, so my friend John, he teaches at the University of Oregon, and he was on a sabbatical and decided to research the American Shakers, which are a group it's a religious community that was founded by this woman, Mother Ann. I'm not sure of the date exactly, but they came over from England. They were persecuted for their religious beliefs. They're sort of an offshoot of the Quakers, and they ended up in New England and created this whole community and had this aesthetic and also, more importantly, this way of living that was this, to them, it was this utopia. It's like hands to work, creating objects and working communally as a way of bringing yourself close to God. They have a crazy religion. There was, Marco Polo, or I don't know, Christopher Columbus was involved in their religion. It was like really wild. Ultimately, their version of utopia didn't involve procreating, so they couldn't have children as part of their religious thing. You had to be indoctrinated into the Shaker community. So, it's not a really sustainable approach for creating a long-lasting utopian community. So right now there's 2 Shakers left, I think. They're 2 elderly women that live in Sabbath Day Lake in Maine, and they're in their 90s, and that's the last 2. At its height, they were spread, I think, as far as maybe as far as the Mississippi in the U.S. and as far down, I don't know, they were kind of getting into the South. I don't know, maybe Georgia or Tennessee, and then all the way up to Maine. At their peak, I mean, there was, I'm not sure of the exact number, but maybe thousands of them. So his sabbatical, the output of his sabbatical was to invite a bunch of friends of his that were designers to go to Hancock Shaker Village in western Massachusetts to do a 5-day workshop retreat there. So we were all friends, we got an Airbnb and basically spent 5 days at Hancock Shaker Village and at a couple other shaker sites in that area. And it was really amazing. I mean, we were able to work with the archivist there, to go through room by room, things in museums that are normally roped off with those velvet curtains. We could just, can we go there? And they'd be like, yeah, you could just go behind it. You could touch anything. I hope I'm not getting them in trouble, but it was really amazing. We could go through the archives, and it was so inspiring just to be around this work and to learn about the shakers from, our archivist Leslie, who was absolutely amazing. These are some of the the buildings, and they kept men and women separate in a lot of instances. So this building was divided in half. There's separate staircases for men and separate staircases for women. There was the brothers' workshop, and there's the sisters' work. It was really pretty intense. But the work that they created and the aesthetic that it just happened. I can't really figure out what it was that made the work so important and so influential. This is some of the exteriors. I mean, they were just onto some other stuff that was way ahead of their time. And their aesthetic, I mean, it reverberates through, modernism and, of course, Danish furniture, the work of Hans Wegener and Georg Morgensen, which is not the right pronunciation. You can see here's an interior. I mean, this is from, I don't even know when, mid-1800s or something. But this is just insanely modern, it's just pared down to the most essential elements and their attention to scale and this, kind of chest of drawers here, and they were obsessed with cleanliness, so all of their stools and everything kind of hung on the wall. They wanted the floor to be super clean. All of their chairs slid under the table, so that they could, they didn't collect dust. It was really amazing. This is the archives. This is also really wild because since it was a communal sort of environment, they weren't claiming ownership. There's very little to link an object to a specific maker. There were different shaker settlements in a shaker chair, for example, the finial on top of the backrest or something. There might be a distinct detail in that you could trace that to Sabbath Day Lake or Hancock Shaker Village. But other than that, it's all anonymous. So when you go to the archives, it's just sorted by typology. It'll be a room full of boxes, and they all sort of look the same, but they're all sort of different. You could see, even though they weren't signed by someone, that somebody kind of, in their own subtle way, kind of put their mark on these products, or not products, on these goods. The other thing I'd like to note about shakers is that people often confuse them with the Amish or Mennonites or other sort of Luddite kind of things that weren't embracing technology. They were so beyond that. They were some of the first people that were buying cars and buying, sewing machines and table saws. They had this crazy, water-powered hydraulic machine shop. They totally embraced the latest and greatest technologies, and they were, that's one thing I think that people think they're kind of this simple thing and they're just living in the past, but they were on top of it. And also a lot of it just looks brown and some of it's very colorful. So these are some shaker boxes, and this sort of gets into the work that I did as part of the workshop. It culminated with a show in New York in 2015, I think, or 2016, with the designers from the original workshop as well as designers from Norway and some other countries that were invited to participate. And this is something that I thought was kind of interesting. It was some tray. It did something at some point, but it was kind of, its function is sort of lost to us. There was also this thing that looks like a part of something. I'm not really sure what it was. But this led to me designing a series of objects. They were a bunch of boxes, you can see. There's a really, right there. So it was in some ways sort of literal, I was just people interpreted the sort of brief in a lot of different ways. Some people looked at cleanliness or different practices. For me, it was more of a formal sort of study. I've always struggled with this when interpreting Shaker work because this project has gone on for a couple of years. It's really hard to add much to the discourse about Shaker life and Shaker objects. I mean, they did it so well the first time. It's like, I feel like it's like hallowed ground. I'm just like, I have nothing to contribute. So in some ways, I look at this and it's, I don't know, I wouldn't call it superficial, but I just sort of looked at it from a more sort of formal and aesthetic treatment. A bunch of boxes. Squares and circles intersecting. That's also a motif that I saw repeated throughout the Shaker village and throughout the Shaker archives, was the intersection of these squares and these circles. This tray obviously kind of goes back to that other tray that I saw. Here's a gift. So on some of these, the lids spin around, and I thought that was a little bit of a novel sort of approach. So you could reveal half of your stuff at once, or not at all. And it goes on for eternity. So that was one of the things that I made. Here's back to that square and circle thing. A lot of in the turnings and also just in the architectural details, you could see a lot of that happening, and that was something that I got into. Another product I made was a set of candle holders. These are setup blocks, and these are used for machinists. I was into this intersection of circles and squares, and I couldn't stop thinking about the machine shop that I would work with that had these blocks flying around, and they were used to set up machining, on Bridgeports or CNC machines. So I decided to make a set of candle holders that were sort of inspired by this circles meeting squares, also by setup blocks, and also just by the idea of like thriftiness. So these are identical, but they have 4 different openings, and they each accommodate a different standard size candle. So you have this kind of standard dinner taper, you have a small tea light, a big tea light, and then a small sort of, it's a European taper or something like that. Because the Shakers were always like very thrifty, they were always, utilizing the material, just maxing out material just to get the most out of the least, I guess. So that spirit of sort of thriftiness and just being aware of materiality led me to this, where it was one material, and just by removing material, you can, if you have a drawer full of odd candles that you haven't used from past dinner parties and things like that, you can make a considered arrangement as a centerpiece using 2 different types of candles. Here's some pictures. So I had a friend machine these in aluminum, and they were tumbled. You can see different sized tea lights. And now these are produced by the same company, Matter, and they're made in stone, in this case marble, solid brass, and aluminum. After that, this is a project, we'll go quickly through this, so we're running long. Harry's is a shaving company in the US, maybe it's here too, I'm not sure. And it's kind of a direct-to-consumer, disruptive shaving company where you pay and this stuff arrives at your door every week. They asked me to design a shaving brush. So this is your typical shaving brush. It has a stand, the razor, the shaving brush is over there. And I wanted to sort of figure out a way to reinterpret that and make something novel and fun. I was obsessed with these toys. They're called Weeble Wobbles, and you push them and they write themselves. They're self-writing, there's a counterweight. It's basically like if you took an egg and put more weight in the bottom. So I went online and did a little bit of work and tried to figure out why these things worked and the math behind it. And after some kind of calculations, I was able to approximate this. This might work, it might not work. This is a video. It's not working. So we'll just go on. Oof. Anyway, I made a Weeble Wobble shaving brush. There's another video after this that'll work. So I found the easiest. It could have been machined, it could have been casted or something, but basically I had it 3D printed in steel, which is expensive, but it was really the way to get there. I mean, that diagram I showed you before, that got me half the way there. I mean, prototyping this, again, for all the students out there, it's like whatever it takes. This is around Easter, and they sell those plastic Easter eggs, so I bought one of those. I bought a bunch of plasticine and just stuffed the bottom of it with plasticine and pennies and nuts and bolts. and had it on a postal scale and was weighing it and adding more pennies till I found out that it had to be X grams, and that led me to, finalize this design. This might play. Anyway, I made this video myself. And yeah. So that was that. That was fun. It was a fun project. Yeah. Serious. All right, I have 2 more projects, and they're both a little bit long form, and I'm going to make it, do the short version. So in 2016, 2017, I was invited to Serva, which is it's in France, in the south of France in Marseille, and it stands for it's a glass research institute, and it's in the south of France. And they've been around since the 90s maybe, and it's sponsored sort of by the French government to some degree. There are all these amazing programs in Europe that don't exist in the US where they support the arts in really meaningful ways. So I think they're a nonprofit, but they invited me to come over for a residency. It was, I went once for 1 week in 2016, and that was part of an exhibition in New York, and that's how I was introduced to them. And we sort of hit it off. It was a really good working relationship, so they invited me back for 2 more weeks in 2017. Whoops. I don't know what this is. No. Let's see. Oh, there, we're back. Okay. So it's a really amazing facility. They have technicians there that work with you. They put you up in this little apartment, and you basically spend all day, for 2 weeks, working with their technicians to make whatever you want. It was an amazing experience for me. I'd never done a residency before. Usually everybody in my professional life is telling me no. I'm like, make it bigger, and they're like, no. And they're like, make it green, and they're like, no. And do this, and everybody's telling me no. But then when you go there, they'll literally do whatever you want. I'm just like, break it. And they're like, okay. And they're like, make it bigger. And no, and do it. And it's it was really an amazing way of working and having these amazingly talented artists and craftspeople to help me sort of realize my vision. I didn't really have a great plan going there. This is more pictures. I mean, it's just, amazing facility. So this is the Unité de Habitation, and it's in Marseille, and it was a sort of utopian community designed in 1947 or 45 or something, post-war thing where people, architects and designers are thinking about new ways to live. Le Corbusier. I think it's Le Corbusier, sorry, I just spaced out. But, there's residential spaces, there's commercial spaces, and that's right around the corner from where Serva was. So I'd ride my bike over there and just check it out because it's this icon. And I took a lot of pictures of it, and the most interesting thing, one of the interesting things, was this cast concrete and this board formed concrete, which you can see in a lot of buildings on the tech campus, that whatever the swimming, or not the swimming thing, but the gymnasium, I guess. If you look at the ceiling, you can see these boards sort of impressed in there, which is amazing. That roof is crazy how they did that with this board form technique. More often than not, you see it in these sort of rectilinear forms. But that texture I thought was really interesting. Again, this is the underside of it, moving in different directions, just because they could. So I wanted to sort of take that sort of idea of this, sort of board form concrete and sort of translate that into glass somehow. I also wanted to work in a more painterly way. I wanted the process to be a little bit more unpredictable. And I mean, glass is already unpredictable, but I wanted to push that. So I made these one-off molds. This is the first one I made, and it failed miserably. And I started making these types of things, where it would take me 3 or 4 hours, and this is all made out of kiln brick from the, that they use for putting glass into the kilns. And I'd make these things for 3 hours. They'd, prepare the glass, and then they'd blow it into these things. We'd rip it all apart, put it in the kiln. You wouldn't know if it worked until the next day, which is sort of maddening. So I'd just go up to my apartment and sit there and be anxious, and then run downstairs in the morning and open the kiln and see how it went. More molds. So I did this, sort of more or less this. I mean, they got better. I learned as I went what worked and what didn't work. and just made tons of these for basically 2 weeks. I mean, we could only really blow, I think, maybe 1 or 2 a day just because of the amount of time it took to make the molds. This is a video. And there's usually some music, but maybe it doesn't work. That's okay. I made this video too. My videos, the production value is getting more elaborate. It's Fernando and David. They're good guys. That's not the music. So, yeah, it's an all hands on deck kind of thing. And you end up with a lot of interesting shapes. So each mold is different, and each piece of glass is different. Again, copyright. So these are some of the things that came out of the molds, and they're in different, I mean, these are usually right when they come out, they need to be heated and just, prepared before they're broken off this punty stick thing and then put in the kiln. It was a really great time. I enjoyed my time there. It was maddening though, because you oftentimes wake up in the morning, the failure rate was super high. So probably out of all the pieces I made, there were only 50 of them made it out of the kiln alive. A lot of it had to do with the fact that the molds were each one was different. So while you could sort of learn something from the previous mold, they were all unique, undercuts and things like that. So the glass blowers had to sort of really, work with me, to get some of these undercuts as the glass moves into the corners, it gets thinner. So there were a lot of pieces that just broke, and it was sort of heartbreaking, but I just had to sort of embrace it, With a lot of the design work that I do, everything's so prescribed, and it's pixel perfect. You just draw it in the computer, and usually it comes out that way. And this way of working was really nice for me. So I made a lot of work there, and I'm not really sure what the output is. It's all still in France, and I'm going to try to go back there this summer and finish what I started. When I left, there's not a good example of it here, but I started to create this way of making modular molds where all of the pieces could be assembled and reassembled in a way that didn't take as long. So you can make a mold in, say, 30 minutes as opposed to 3 hours. And that would be that's what I would do when I go back. So that's my friend Helger, and that's me. And this is us. We were working with a Danish company. He is a friend that I met in Milan. I met him at a bar, typical kind of Milan thing, probably Barbasso if you've ever been to Milan. And he's based in Norway. He lives and works, he's Norwegian, he lives in Oslo. And we just kind of hit it off, and would bunk together. We get an Airbnb in Milan and just look at things and talk about whatever, bike riding or, swimming and whatever, design and things like that. We got along really well, and we became fast friends. At some point, we decided that we wanted to start working together. Both of us had our own studios where we worked basically by ourselves, sometimes with an intern, sometimes with an assistant. And I was interested in working with Scandinavian companies, and he was interested in working with American companies. At that time, Scandinavian companies were a little bit more insular. You had companies that were named One Nordic that seemed to only work with Norwegian designers or designers from that part of the world. And then you had companies in the US that I was working with that were more champions of American design or something. So we decided we'd pool our resources, we'd come up with some designs collaboratively, and we pitched them both to European companies and American companies. So we've done a bunch of projects over the last 3 years, and this is the last one here, and this is our most recent project. And this, for anybody that's interested in the professional practice side of how a product maybe comes to fruition, this is a good sort of primer, I guess, however you say it. We were given a brief by the American company Design Within Reach to design basically an upholstered chair family. The design said they wanted, they specified all this stuff, the cost, the dimensions. They told us what chairs on the market were occupying a similar space. They said they wanted it to be linear. They said they wanted it to be angular and light and, all of these different things. So we began with a kind of a lengthy research phase. And it was really nice working with another designer finally to be able to bounce ideas off each other and sort of work collaboratively as opposed to just being stuck in your own head. So this is the super, I can't say it right, leggera chair, it's an Italian word. It's a supremely light cafe chair, and this is Fred Sandbeck, who does these. I don't know if he's still alive, but a lot of his work was done in the 60s and 70s, but he's a contemporary of Donald Judd, and that's these really amazing sculptures with thread. We also wanted this, the price point was pretty high, so we started researching exclusive luxury goods. And, we were looking at details. I mean, we have this secret Pinterest board, which has, thousands of images at this point. We continually add to it, even though the project is over, just as this sort of resource for generating new proposals for companies. We're looking at just opulent, extravagant, exclusive interiors here. And also just, we're like any good designer, I mean, you're just looking at everything all at once and sort of condensing everything you sort of see and distilling it into a vision or a point of view. We were talking about dining chairs, so it seemed like interesting, to have some meat in our proposal. Then we, after that, we went into sketching, and we went into this really intense sketching zone for like a month or so. And he would sketch, and then I would sketch. There was a 6-hour time difference, so he would be sketching. I'd wake up and run upstairs with a cup of coffee and get onto the computer at like 9 a.m., which was like 3 p.m. his time. We'd work together for about 2 hours until he went home for dinner, and then I would start sketching. So it was almost like this relay race where he would pass the baton to me, and then I would take it. And it led to this kind of nice way of working where there was moments of collaboration, but then there was moments of reflection where I didn't have to worry about talking to him. I knew that he wasn't going to bother me and ask me some question or whatever, and I could just sort of run with it. So we just went through this process, and we would print them out. And anywhere. I mean, some of these were taken, with his phone, and he'd text them to me. And, I'd print one out, and then I'd draw on top of it and send it back to him, and then he'd draw on top of it. So we were just drawing, and, this is the first project of this complexity that we'd worked with. I mean, chairs are sort of this holy grail fetishized furniture object. So it was a lot of pressure on both of us, but as we were sketching, we saw different themes start to emerge. And yeah, I mean, from there, there's obviously a lot of conversations that went into all of this, but certain themes started to emerge, and we got closer and closer to what would be our sort of final design in the proposal. I guess some of the hallmarks, were this sort of this angled back piece, the sort of kink, in the back seat where it kind of hits your lumbar support or lumbar region, and then the sort of wide back panel that splits the back of the chair sort of visually in two. One thing we were thinking about with dining chairs is that, like all chairs, it's sort of weird, it's like cars or something, or maybe not like cars. I think it's just chairs. But when you have like a chair, you usually see pictures of them and they're shot like this low angle across, like no one's sitting in them. It's this 3/4. They're really beautiful, glamorous looking things. And that's great, but that's usually not how they're experienced in the real world. I mean, typically if you're sitting in a chair, you can't see the chair. You're just sort of judging it on the merits of its, comfort or whatever. So the looks are sort of secondary. I guess that's what I was saying about cars. When you're in the car, you don't see the outside of the car. Obviously, you just see the inside of the car. So it's like, I guess you imagine what you look like in the car, and that makes you feel better about yourself, or not. So, and then also chairs, like typically, especially dining chairs are seen pushed up to tables. So we felt like, having a really attractive chair from the back was really important, because when you're in it, and then when you're not in it, it's pushed up to a table, and you're usually seeing the back of it. So this is usually how we work. This is some screenshot, and this is his situation. So that's my messy studio there on Skype, and here he is. I don't know what program he's using. Is this SolidWorks? No. SketchUp. Well, he usually works in SolidWorks, but I know why. Because when we're designing things, I mean, there's so much work that's already been done for you, and you don't really have to like reinvent the wheel in so many ways. I mean, a chair is a chair, and the human body hasn't changed that much over, whatever, over time. So it's, we were doing this, and maybe this is a common thing to do with designers, but it's really easy to access sort of 3D models of chairs, that you can import to SketchUp, SolidWorks, Rhino, or whatever. So they're really good to use as references for just overall height and relationships. If you have a chair that's really comfortable that you love, take measurements off that if you're designing a chair. Or if there's one that you sat in a showroom, just go onto their website, download the chair, drop it into SolidWorks, and you can start pulling things. I don't know what he was doing with this rectangle, maybe just seeing the relationship between that top of the back and down to where the leg is hitting. And then you can start, obviously you can get the dimensions from the manufacturer, but you can start pulling subtle things like the curvature of the seat, the angle of the seat in relation to the backrest. So there was a lot of that. You can prove a chair and just, seeing what had been done, what was successful, and what we liked about it, and then pulling sort of data points from existing designs, and then working that back into our model. We made the decision at some point that Helger was going to do all of the 3D modeling, which was, he did a ton of work, and it ended up being, I feel really bad. He just really killed himself doing all this stuff. At a certain point, with any sort of 3D modeling, jumping into somebody else's 3D model is like stepping onto the highway or something. It's just like so intense, and it makes sense for them, but you're just like, what? You can't decipher anything, the order of operations and the extrusions and fillets, and it also was all in Norwegian. So like when I would open his file, like everything was just made no sense to me whatsoever. So these are just some early 3D models, pulling stuff that we thought was important from our sketches and incorporating them into this drawing. At this point, we had this design was sort of coming together. It had something going on that we liked, enough so that we could put a proposal together for the brief to basically get approval to move into the second phase of our design. They design within reach, they work in two things. There's the first approval of the concept, and then there's the final approval of the production ready piece, and you get paid at each phase. This is an armchair, working on detailing on the top of the arms, stretcher systems. We were also kind of working back and forth. So while he was doing some of the 3D modeling, I was taking those models and spitting them out into Rhino and smashing them and turning them into small scale models. So these are maybe not quarter scale, but I don't know, maybe fifth or something. They're pretty small. Just looking at proportions and things. Modeling, upholstery is pretty difficult, so I found the easiest, like in the computer, so I found the easiest way to just get some basic measurements or just get this sort of lumpy thing, going on was to take plasticine and just form it over these kind of wooden structure underneath. Made a ton of these. And then came the one-to-one sort of model just to make sure the ergonomics were fine. So, you could do this on a CNC machine, maybe you think you need to have some sort of elaborate mill or something to make these foam models, but this was basically me sectioning our SolidWorks model in 1-inch intervals, printing these things out on my, you can see the templates are taped together. It's just typing paper, tracing it onto layers of 1-inch foam, and then gluing them all up to get, these sort of contour and the shape of the backrest and things like that. This is the kind of ergonomic buck thing, whatever they call it, that I made in my attic. And you can see the foam's there on the back. You can see that kink, and everything is right where it needs to be. All of the sort of substructure here is just sort of in service to making a mock-up that was easily manipulated. So there's a chain on the side, and just by moving, that drywall screw link by link on the chain, you could adjust the angle. And from there, you could pull measurements, and then we would adjust this thing until it felt right, raise things, jack the seat up. There's some piece of a candle holder wedged in there, and then pulling, measurements from this one-to-one scale model, and then feeding that back into SolidWorks to inform the final design. This is a one-to-one, so this is printed huge on a plotter. This is a one-to-one version of the chair, and I brought this while Halger was modeling things, since Design Within Reach is based in the US, I had to do all of the heavy lifting when it came to reviewing prototypes. So I was constantly taking a train from Washington D.C. up to Stamford, Connecticut, where they're based, with big drawings like this to assess the prototypes. In the beginning, they were working with 2 factories, and we were, going back and forth. The quality was both pretty good, and it ultimately came down to the factory outside of Bangkok being the easiest one to work with. So you can see the full-scale drawing, examining stretchers, making sure that the leg angle and things like that, all the sort of relationships are as we drew them. We made a lot of these things, which are sort of not very scientific, but they're just basically animated GIFs, analyzing the 2 different chairs to see what happens, And there's like subtle differences. You can see like the back legs are sort of, don't move at all, but you can see the front legs are moving in and out. The relationship between the back of my knee and the front of the seat is changing. The height of the stretcher is changing. There's a lot of little things happening. And when you're looking at 2 different chairs that are existing in 3-dimensional space with all these angles and things happening, it's really difficult to look at it and see the differences. It's hard to even measure these things. You're just like, what's happening? So we found that doing these animated GIFs was a really nice way to see what was happening in a sort of unscientific way. But we're like, okay, this is coming up, this is moving in, this is moving out. This is about exactly a year ago, 2018, Helga and I went to Bangkok with the production team, and we went into the factory review. We showed up. This factory was really amazing. It's better than most. They had a lot of really great technicians there that were willing to make modifications to these models in real time. So here we showed up, and it was basically I think it's rubber wood. It was some sort of tropical wood that they make prototypes out of. But you can see this thing's been cut and screwed and glued back together a million times over the course of 3 days. It was a constant back and forth trying to get this thing just right. The prototypes were really, really close, but there's practical sort of considerations that happen, in the manufacturing process that, it's a push and pull. So again, here, just us looking at different structures and analyzing the foam. And here are the final chairs that Design Within Reach launched this past September. You can see they're offered in a few different types of wood, walnut on the right and then American ash on the left, leather, fabric, different finishes. They're also offered in bar stools. So we designed a whole family. There's 2 different heights of stool, armchair, and side chair. And that's me. So then this is where I work, this last slide. This is my studio. I sit there by myself. I have that chair and I go back and forth. I run SolidWorks on that computer. I have a Mac over here. It's the record I produced, stereo, some prototypes, and that's it.